Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about why it's a good idea to do some training on the sumo deadlift even if you pull conventional. And I am saying this being as undogmatic as possible because I tend to hold the viewpoint that I would actually like to see sumo deadlift banned in powerlifting. But does that mean that I wouldn't personally pull sumo if I could pull 10 pounds more at a meet? That's what it comes down to, isn't it? Right? That's what those things come down to. When people are talking about in competition versus just training, it's important to remember, even if you feel something can in some cases give an unfair advantage or that it's unorthodox or non-traditional, and that's kind of my view of it. I'm kind of a deadlift purist because deadlift is my favorite exercise. I love the conventional deadlift. I tend to be a purist about that myself. And so I'm one of those people who would be kind of happy if sumo deadlift was banned in a powerlifting meet. But by that same token, if I was coaching a group of lifters and I had 6 lifters and 3 of them pulled more sumo in the gym, I would sure put them up there and have them pull sumo in competition if I was coaching them, right? Why? Well, because when you're an athlete or a lifter or you're coaching lifters, your job is to win. You win by any means at your disposal, and that includes whatever the rules allow. If the rules allow you to do something and it gives you an advantage for you personally, then you obviously would do that if you want to win. Right? It should be common sense. And I'll go so far as to say that if you can break a rule that you'll be allowed to get away with. If you know you'll be allowed to cheat and you choose to do so, if you really want to win, you're going to do that too. I mean, that's reality. That's what competitive sports are. But when it comes to training, let's talk about this for a little bit. Let's talk about it for a little bit. Should people consider training both lifts? Yeah, I think there's merit to doing so. Even if I tell people, look, I think the conventional deadlift is a better test of your overall strength, and because for some people the sumo just has a leverage advantage, it lets them lift more than they'd otherwise be able to. I could make all those statements. I could even argue that in some cases maybe the conventional deadlift is a better all-around strength builder. Now, that's my bias. That's my personal bias. I could see a counter argument that would show that I'm wrong there, and I accept that. And I admit that's my personal bias. So I tend to not let novice lifters do sumo at all in programs. I say that's the conventional deadlift. That's what you're doing. But is there merit to training sumo also? Yes, absolutely. If you pull sumo in competition, should you still pull conventional sometimes in your training? Yes, you should. Yes, you should. And here's why. If you are trying to train and you are trying to get strong and you're trying to gain muscle and you're trying to do all these things irrespective of what it is that you are going to compete in or nothing at all, our goal should be to gain muscle and to remain injury free, right? We're trying to gain strength, we're trying to get generally strong, and we're trying to gain muscle. Because the stance and the muscles involved in the ratios on these two lifts is slightly different, they each bring something a little different to the table. We can argue that one uses the hips a little more, one uses the spinal erectors a little more than the other. One might be slightly more quad dominant and the other more hamstring dominant. We can get into these arguments and these nuances. But the fact of the matter is, they each kind of bring something a little different to the table. And if you're really good at one and you're not good at the other, that's indicative of a possible strength imbalance. And when we're talking about things like injury prevention, and injury prevention is not just about injury prevention in the gym, it's about injury prevention when you get out onto any sort of physical activity. Because let's be honest here, if we're all training, we're trying to be fit, I would hope. So if we're ever put in a situation to where we need to exert ourselves, whether it's in a sporting environment or a survival situation, or you get thrown into a conflict or a fight that you didn't even want to be in, being as strong as possible through different planes of motion and not having weaknesses, more likely to keep you from getting hurt. It's just a good idea. I mean, if you're going to put in the time, if you're going to train and you're going to put in the effort anyways, you might as well get as many little fringe benefits out of it as possible. And so you're going to tend to have less imbalances through things like your hips and your abductors and just your lower body in general if you train both of these vastly different stances, right? That's something to factor in. There's merit to that. right? And that's just from a strength balance perspective when you get out onto some sort of playing field, whether it's an actual sport or, playing fields could be thrown into a conflict or a street fight or a home invasion, right? Where you're forced into some conflict in some way. You really don't want to have any major weaknesses in your body. It's to your advantage to be as strong as possible through every awkward angle possible. And these two lifts present you with two pretty serious awkward angles, right? It's a good strength builder. But let's talk about overuse injuries. Well, that's one of the things, the biggest arguments against minimalist training. I'm normally a fan of minimalist training. I tell most of you out there that your first year, maybe first 2 years in the gym should be minimalist. Minimalism means minimal exercise variation. You need to just get really, really strong at a handful of general lifts. You don't need variations. Well, the problem we run into when we do get really strong, it's easy to get really strong at one lift and you'll gain a lot of muscle and strength. But when you don't do any variations and you start to get really strong, you do tend to get hurt easier, right? It comes down to overuse. And overuse injuries are the cause of most injuries. All right, it's not bad form. And people need to understand that. Unless your form is egregious, we don't tend to get hurt very often in the gym due to bad form. We get hurt generally due to overuse injuries. And it's usually overuse as it pertains to connective tissue. Like we have a tendon that gets worked at that one specific angle over and over and over and beat up so much that it can't heal appropriately. And we tend to work the same spots more and more in that same tendon when it pulls that same angle. When you make minor adjustments and do a variation of a lift, it tends to accumulate the stress a little differently through joints and tendons and things like that. It does tend to accumulate those things, those little micro tears and stuff that when they get too large and they're not allowed enough time to heal and inflammation goes up, they tend to snap. That's what gets us hurt, especially when form breaks down and then we fall out of our form, right? The overuse injuries tend to really show when we're really close to having an overuse injury and then form breaks down. That's when disaster happens. That's when you see it. Most common time you see it. So we get fatigued and form breaks down, and that happens. Well, exercise variation does a couple things for us. Number one, it kind of reduces the chances of overuse injuries in general. So if we're going to come in and put in the same amount of training volume, let's say it's 12 sets per week with fairly heavy weight of a given sort of movement pattern. Well, if you split that up a little bit, maybe 8 of one, 4 of the other, 9 of one, 3 of the other, doesn't have to be 50-50. We do kind of disperse that chances of overuse injury a little bit more, right? So that's one area in which it helps. Number two, movement patterns themselves. If you want to get good at a movement pattern, you do need to practice it, right? So if you want to be good at the conventional deadlift, you should probably practice it. If you want to be good at the sumo deadlift, you should practice it. If you want to get good at the bench press, you should practice it. In other words, a weighted dip might make you stronger at the bench press, but it's not going to give you the movement pattern itself. You need to practice those patterns. But that's the one problem we run into with complete specificity is that what happens when you get out of your groove. You tend to sometimes be weak through a similar bar path. Well, doing variations like this can help us be strong at slightly awkward angles. Because isn't that what form breakdown is? Isn't that what bad form is? If your form is bad and it breaks down and your lift looks sloppy, your bar path has changed. You've been thrown into some awkward angle. Well, doing a little bit of lift variations, particularly with fairly heavy weights, can train us to still have strength at those different joint angles where we sometimes get thrown into awkward angles that are different from our main lift. So that also can help develop a strength that doesn't allow us to get hurt as easily when form breaks down. In other words, people who are generally strong get hurt less often from bad form than people who train with pure specificity if the form breaks down on that one lift that they're really good at doing. I'm not saying it's guaranteed, you can still get hurt. We can always get hurt. You can always get hurt. Now, granted, you're more likely to get hurt on your way to the gym driving your car than you are to actually get hurt lifting heavy weight in the gym statistically. But, we should still be thinking these things in terms of our training. So it's beneficial from a couple different perspectives. Number one, it has to do with muscle weaknesses, all around strength, reducing our chances of overuse injuries, and improving our general strength in a way that can also make us more resilient to injuries that occur as a result of bad form or a shifted bar path on a really heavy max lift. So when it comes to something like someone who trains the conventional and they only want to train the conventional, I get it, I understand that. But you still might want to consider building at least a base with the sumo deadlift, right? You might want to at least consider it, even if you want to make the conventional your primary pull, and vice versa. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.